So, cute little games being played by the man who thinks he can slither his way to another term in Parliament. Why? Because all those TILs are going to be in place. Nobody's going to change their mind. I'm the one with more people who love me on the internet. More on that in a moment. Now, the Prime Minister is playing a ridiculous game where a piece of legislation which was introduced by his government based off a report which was compiled for his government is trying now to pretend that the nature-positive mess that would be something like the heritage orders in Western Australia, where Indigenous heritage meant you had to get somebody else to double-check whether you could do the smallest or the biggest thing to the place of which you own. This time, rather than Indigenous heritage, it would be all around environmental impacts. Well, they say that, this piece of legislation is apparently gone, but is it? The Premier of Western Australia has made it very clear he does not want this anywhere near what looks to be a re-elected Labor government in Western Australia. I don't say that because I like it. You know my thoughts on Roger Cook, particularly his performance during the pandemic. That poor little girl who died in the hospitals, the idea that he gets rewarded in any way, not a fan. But it is where it is, and the bookies seem to believe that they're going to remain in government. But something as bad as the heritage laws, which they introduced, by the way, at the state parliament, that they pulled because of its potential effects not just on the government, but also on The Voice a couple of years ago, they don't want this thing anywhere near Western Australia. In fact, they've sort of referred to the latte sippers that are pushing this thing. These are the Greens, or the Labor people who should be Greens, who want a stronger environmental cop. Now, we've seen in places like Queensland the absurdity of things like land clearing laws. I remember being in Rockhampton for Beef Week a few years ago, and people were red hot. This is their land. They know how best to take care of it because, breaking news to the share house kids, if they ruin their land, they ruin their business. So they want to take care of their land by maybe clearing a tree here, clearing a tree there, because either it's so close to the house that if there's a storm, it'll crush their house, or they want to get rid of the crap so they can expand a paddock. I know, crazy stuff. But a new Environmental Protection Authority, which always sounds lovely, and you think about, clean air and clean water, but all of those rules already exist. Instead, a federal level of bureaucracy that is so red hot that even a Labor Premier themselves say, not on our watch. Business groups have joined the same call over the past couple of days. The Business Council of Australia has said, shelve this thing, get rid of it, don't go back, don't touch it. In fact, they're the boss of the BCA, Brand Black, I think we've got a photo of him here. This is what he said to The Australian this weekend, that they urge the government to shelve the legislation until after the election, then work with all the stakeholders to undertake a holistic reform of the Environmental Protection Act in line with the review which had been put in place. Now, that's relatively soft criticism compared to what was happening with the Western Australian Premier. But I'm talking about this because, guess what? Each way elbow, saying one thing before an election and most likely you will get something very different after. Don't wake up and whinge. Don't tell me in 2 years, geez, I wish we knew about... We've been banging on about this for months. And no matter their attempt to change the subject, if the Greens are the tail that wags the dog due to preferences and the crossbench, this comes back. In fact, have a look at this. Despite the fact that the spin today from taxpayer media was that Labor has shelved its contentious nature-positive laws, suggesting that in an interview with the Conversations Politics podcast, the Prime Minister has conceded he couldn't see, quote, a path to success for the reform. So at this stage, I can say we won't be proceeding with it in this term, adding the government would continue to discuss the issue during the next term of Parliament. So, is everyone paying attention? The law is not dead. It isn't really even in deep freeze. The Prime Minister is simply removing it from the West Australian election right now, removing it from the federal election right now, with an absolute plan to reintroduce it with what he believes will be more favourable numbers in the Senate, or if he's in a minority government, there'll be a wilder version of it, because potentially Victorian Teals, and certainly the Greens, well, they will want it to be even bigger, even louder. Pay attention. How you vote matters, you know that, but where your preferences go also matter. If preferences are the same way they were back in 2019, then surprise result may be on the cards. If it's bugger them all and you want to send the preference out for a long wander, then guess what? You're most likely going to end up with either the government we currently have or a reduced version of it at the next election. We'll talk plenty more about this, and others will pretend that they have always fought the fight. You know how long we've been talking about it. I look forward to talking about it specifically with James Ashby, who was the first to talk about it here on Paul Murray Live many months ago.